Hello, 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 everybody. And once again, welcome to another national team interview for the EUROBOWL 2024, hosted in Greece, Athens. This time, I am joined by one of the newcomer team's captains from Canada. If you wouldn't mind introducing yourselves.
Hi, I'm Sean. I'm captain of Team Canada, and I'm very excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Pleasure to have you here. Um, as normally, just for your viewers, normally we talk at the very start. We talk about a team's sort of history with EuroBowl, but because Canada is a newcomer nation, they obviously don't have a EuroBowl background. But I would still like you to tell us a little bit about like the sort of what kind of a team do you have? Do you have more of like new blood, or do you have like tournament veterans from your own tournament circuits here?
Yeah, so we have a bit of a mixed bag of both of those. One thing when we started putting together a national team was to try and make sure that it would be representative of Canada as a whole. So as Canada is quite a large country, there's quite a few different pockets, and it's kind of rare for some of those pockets to intersect for different tournaments. So for example, the West Coast and the East Coast are quite far apart. So we have representatives on our squad from British Columbia on the West Coast, from Alberta, from Ontario, and from Quebec. So we've managed to pick up a number of the major hubs
Mm.
and having representatives from each of those different areas. So we're very happy about that. In terms of the squad's experience, we have a number of individuals that have been to multiple World Cups, some
Mm.
that have been to just a single World Cup, and some that have never been to international Blood Bowl competitions. So we have a bit of a spectrum. I think kind of as the origins of Canada joining the EuroBowl, we had a pretty good showing as far as Canada is concerned at the last World Cup. A number of our squads ended up placing, reasonably high and played at reasonably high tables at various points, and so people had certainly had a good time, and they enjoyed being able to play against some top European competition. And so there was certainly an appetite for putting together a national squad and having some fun in Europe. So we were very glad to have been invited to submit a squad, and I'm honored to be captaining that squad, and we're very much looking forward to participating.
I'm glad to hear that you've had good times when you've been here. A little bit. Tell us a little bit about like how exactly was the captaincy for the national team? How was the selection process for that? And obviously after that, like how was the selection process other than inclusion? Like, was there a specific sort of system that you used, or was it more of a captain's choice?
Mhm. So I had a number of people that had reached out to me personally to suggest that I take the charge in terms of captaining Team Canada. And given that there was going to be a significant amount of legwork involved in that process, we had there was a bit of a discussion that went on, including like the Canada NAF representative and as well as other members of the community. And it was decided that I would kind of be the official captain
Mm.
and take control of all the logistics involved in assembling a squad and making sure that we show up to Athens. So I was then responsible for selecting the squad. Um, so in terms of like a charter, I know a number of countries have like official EuroBowl charters for how to develop national teams.
Mm.
So as this was our first time around, we didn't have a formal process in place. That's
Mm.
something that we intend to develop kind of in the near future for going forward.
Mm.
But in terms of the selection process, I had put together a kind of a document, if you will, that like a Google sheet that took into account a whole bunch of different factors in terms of people's rankings, whether it be elo based or glyco based, as well as some online experiences, as well as performances that in kind of larger national tournaments and more international tournaments, and based on all that, kind of created a bit of an evaluation of different individuals.
Mm.
And then, like I said, one of the main criteria was to make sure that we had representation from across the country.
Mm.
So it was in terms of both like a quantitative assessment, of just like the straight numbers that are calculated, as well as a bit of a qualitative assessment in terms of talking with individuals from different regions, because some of the areas, for example, I was less familiar with, but to get a bit of an idea of who are the the top players in these areas, in those areas, etc., and encouraging people to apply. And in the end, we ended up having about 30 people that applied, which was we were very, very happy with that. We weren't sure exactly, because it's a bit of a journey to come from Canada to Europe, and a number of people had gone, for example, for the World Cup last year, and so there's also a financial component.
Yeah, well,
So you
absolutely.
never know exactly who who's interested, but we were very happy with the squad of 8 that we have right now, and yeah, we're looking forward to participating.
Just as one of the things that I'm personally curious about, like, is there a lot of sort of overlap between, like, do a lot of Canadian Blood Bowl players go to play in the U.S. and or vice versa? Like, is that a thing, or are they mostly separate sort of circuits?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, obviously, kind of the northern U.S. states, especially where they're kind of very close to the Canadian provinces, there's tends to be quite a bit of overlap. So, for example, in the region that I'm in, which is the kind of Ontario, Quebec region, so our tournament series, which is the GLAM, which is the Great Lakes Oracle Tournament
Yeah,
Series,
yeah.
spans across both the provinces of Ontario, Quebec, as well as a number of different states in the United States. So we have coaches from Michigan and other areas that like Ohio and Indiana that come across the border fairly regularly for tournaments, especially for some of the larger tournaments. So there's some familiarity with members of the United States team for sure. There's a couple of tournaments. There's one in particular that a number of us go to that tends to be the Underworld Cup in Michigan, where people from across the United States tend to fly in and come visit, go to attend that one. So that one tends to be a very high level of competition and tends to have coaches from across the United States, as well as in some of the Canadian areas. So that's one that really ties together some of those, but there aren't so many of those events, as is a bit of a further commitment. And we just recently, this past year, for example, in June, had the Immortal Cup, which is North America's team championships. So that also brought together members of people from all over the United States and all over Canada, and we had a number of Europeans that also came over. Yeah.
Well, it sounds like a in essentially it is just a case that like both the US and Canada are both such like large in like land volume countries that like what would constitute like several different nations from Europe coming together is just the US and Canada, just because of the vast distances that both countries cover. But it is good to hear that there's a lot of that sort of positive interaction going on between the two sort of two nations, like Blood Bowl communities, and it's always good that people like from all over can come together, and like you can see what kind of metas there are, and like you can pick up some neat tricks and such from such experiences, certainly. We did have Sedasak on sorry if I butchered that name in the chat, who is the Greek captain who I have interviewed just very recently, who said sounds like a nightmare task, Sean. Hats off for pulling it off. So it certainly
Thank you.
does sound like a fairly when thinking about like my own understanding of like how the system of like getting the team together works in like Sweden or Finland, it does definitely sound like there's a lot more logistics involved for the Canadian team, just again due to the vast distances that you need to sort of cover.
Yeah, and I mean for sure, and like even just like, so we were fortunate enough to have a number of different areas, like for example regions that were posting within their own regions to kind of encourage their best, their strongest players to apply. But even once the squad was formulated, there's a 3 hour time zone between a number of people, so 2 hours time zone between a lot of the people. So that also made it a little bit challenging for, coordinating meetings to make
Yeah.
sure that there's a time of day that would work for most people. Because, at a early evening time out east is, middle, like just work day is just finishing out west. And so there's some logistical challenges with that. The EUROBOWL build itself was a bit of a complex one that certainly required some interactions and discussions. So that was um, an additional challenge that we had the pleasure of kind of dealing with. But everybody was great, and we had created like a Canadian Discord, and we were able to use that quite a bit and set up different meetings and have a bunch of discussions for strategizing, and then we were all able to get together. Actually, everyone happened to be present at the Immortal Cup in June in Ottawa. So everybody got to meet and spend some time together and have an in-person discussion there and take a team photo and that kind of stuff. So
Yeah, that it is definitely glad to hear that you managed to make it work, and looking forward to the sort of results of that the team coming together in the EuroBowl. But speaking of the team, shall we move on to first of the rosters on the list? That is going to be and just as I say that, the page decides to refresh. So that Canada. And so the first up, we have Dark Elves, Bad Cuz.
Yeah. So Bad Cuz is a coach out of the British Columbia area, so out of the kind of Vancouver scene. So on the West Coast, he's had a lot of success playing Dark Elves in some of the larger kind of tournaments out there. So he was a natural choice to continue with Dark Elves. We certainly had a number of other coaches that would be strong with them, but that happens to be one of his very strong races. He also had a very strong finish at the Immortal Cup playing Corn, but he ended up going with the Dark Elf build. So he ended up taking just using the standard
the vanilla version.
vanilla kind of build, and that's actually kind of a bit of a theme. We didn't take too many of the blessings, which I think is maybe counter to some of the different other countries. But when we were kind of assessing that, we went through all the different blessings and all the different races and kind of evaluated which races could benefit from which blessings, and kind of also where people's interests aligned with which builds with which races they might be interested in playing, and seeing how that kind of balanced. And in the end, especially one of the dominant factors for us was to make sure that everyone would be happy with what they are playing and something that they're comfortable with, and something that they're flying across the ocean to play with. So to make sure that they're going to enjoy themselves as well. So for this build, he didn't take any blessings, and just dodged up all 4 blitzers, a block and a wrestle witch, a runner, an assassin, and 3 rerolls. So I think 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So just 11 players, 3 rerolls, and a lot of block dodge, wrestle dodge kind of, which I think is oftentimes fairly standard or common, if you will, with for Dark Elves.
Absolutely, and it's like in a tournament setting where a lot like obviously if you're dwarves you're gonna go like I can deal with the dodge, but most other teams that will only have like the one tackle piece. So blodge is going to be very strong, and this is definitely, I think this would be the roster. Like for me personally, if I was running like without any blessings, a Dark Elf roster, like this has the runner, which I heartily approve of. Has 1 assassin, which I think is going to be pretty good in the because there's going to be a fair amount of teams in the meta that are running the AV8 plus, like Amazons in particular, for example, and Skaven come to mind as a good stab targets for the assassin. The one thing that I do want to ask is, was there ever a contention that he'd go for an Apo? Because for the Dark Elves, I feel that like the positionals are just so important. So
Yeah, so there he played around with options, for example, even taking like the extra cash
Mm,
to fit in more stuff and to kind of to look into some of those things. So those are some options that he play tested and looked into,
mm,
and this is he kind of ended up going with this build. One of the kind of main advantages of that is you've got the high speed.
yeah.
So you have a bunch of seven movement players, and you're kind of um, playing a bit more of a high risk kind of reward kind of trade off there because you don't have, for example, the APO, you don't
Mm,
have a bench.
mm,
And so, if you get a couple of unlucky removals early on, that could be a tough game. That's
yeah.
for sure. Um, but that's something that was definitely play tested. Um, and Yeah, one other thing, kind of just to kind of build on that you had mentioned, for example, of as like a meta that dwarves might be a tough matchup with
Mm,
all the dodge and all the tackle. We kind of from our assessment didn't necessarily feel that dwarves had a very good build in this meta,
mm,
and we also felt that chaos dwarves was playable for sure, but maybe not like an elite pick, and so
mm,
we kind of expected that maybe we would see fewer of those teams,
mm, mm.
and that kind of was a bit more reflected in, I guess, some of the elf heavy um, rosters, I guess. So at one point there was ideas floating around of taking all four elves, but that
Mm.
kind of felt like a bit too much. But so we ended up with three elves.
All right. All right. What can you tell me about Padkus as a coach himself?
Well, I mean,
He,
everybody here is a strong coach. He
mm.
he enjoys. Sorry, pardon.
No, no, I was just wondering that is he like does he have a lot of like was he for example one of the coaches that went to a World Cup that you mentioned, or is he newer to
Oh,
the to coming over?
gotcha. Yeah, so he did not attend the World Cup. He did go to a Moracle
Mm,
in this past June, and he's been to a number of Spike majors out
mm,
in BC.
mm,
But he is one of the coaches that has doesn't have like international Blood Bowl experience,
mm.
so it'll be a new experience for him that I think he's very much looking forward to taking on.
Yeah, I hope he'll have a good time, and I can understand like for people who it is going to be a new experience. Like I can understand that it can be somewhat nerve wracking coming to like a country that you might not have visited before. Like there's the and like as you mentioned, like Canada is a very different sort of temperature place when it comes to like temperature to Greece. Like Greek temperatures can get quite high and then can get quite dry in there, like dry heat in there as well. So hopefully that doesn't play
Mhm.
too much havoc for you guys.
Yeah, I think hopefully we'll be okay. I think most people have arrived with enough time to kind of get used to the jet lag and
Yeah.
be all settled by the tournament. So,
Yeah, yeah, it is definitely one of those things that like it's good to be very prepared for it. Like if you're coming from a longer distance, it is something that like for example for the Finnish team, like it's not much of an issue. Like we're at the exact same time zone as Greece, and like it only takes like a couple of hours to fly from there. But like for those of you who are coming from Canada as well as like the U.S. and Australia, who's also coming in, like there are extra considerations to be taken into account. And hopefully all goes well. We all know how much like air traffic can sometimes botch things up. So hopefully none of that happens
well,
here.
to make things even more interesting, Air Canada had a potential strike starting that was going to
Mm,
be maybe starting September, 17th, right when I was about to fly over here, September 19th. So that kept things um, a bit uncertain about how
mm.
we were all going to be getting here. But thankfully, they worked out a deal and everything flew as expected. So the Canadian team made it in the end. So,
All
yeah.
right. That's good to hear. All right, moving on to another elf coach. We have Bestich. Do correct me
Mhm.
if I pronounce this wrong. Um, I think this is so far out of the rosters that we have taken a look at. This is the only Wood Elf roster that I have seen that does not bring a Treeman with it.
Yeah, sounds about right. Yeah, so Basish is a coach out of Alberta.
Mm,
He also was attended the Immortal Cup and had a good showing there. This is also his first international
mm,
experience. He was playtesting a number of things. Elven Union is probably one of his favorite teams.
mm,
He likes the Elven Union, Wood Elves, Skaven, those kind of dash style of play.
mm,
Um, and um, and when Wood Elves became available, he ended up playtesting a bit. He played a bit with the tree,
mm,
which I think is, certainly in a lot of from my experience, in a lot of the European stylists also to play with the tree.
mm,
I'd say that's also the case in Canada. So him not taking the tree is a bit uh, not the most common selection.
mm.
He certainly valued the flexibility and the mobility of the team, and kind of felt that rather than the tree that can kind of get stuck in place. And so he kind of opted for the combination of an extra lineman and an apothecary instead
Mm.
of the tree. So it'll be he's play tested it as well, and that kind of fit more with the style of play that he was comfortable playing. And so um, yeah, we'll see how it goes for him. But certainly, if you can kind of survive that initial, let's say, for example, on defense, those 3 hits on the line,
Mm,
all of a sudden now you have 11 bodies that can kind of move around and kind of get to where they need to get to.
mm,
Whereas the tree, oftentimes, you kind of, when you have him, you kind of set him up as a bit of an anchor
yep,
and kind of levered around that to kind of force the play one way or another.
yep.
Um, but yeah, so a stylistic difference from, for example, what like I personally am used to, and what I know is kind of very common in Europe. So that might also catch some people off guard, as they're maybe not quite as used to that style of wood elf play. So.
Yeah. Another thing that might catch people off guard is the War Dancer with Frenzy, as often I believe pretty much every other Wood Elf coach so far has had a Strip Ball Tackle rather than Strip Ball Frenzy as their War Dancer skills. So, um, any particular thoughts on why Frenzy in particular?
Yeah, I mean, frenzy versus tackle is always one of those ever, a question for the ages on
Mm,
word answers. I know personally, I've played with both of them,
mm,
and I think they both have tremendous value and tremendous merit. Personally, I give tackle a bit of a higher value for me because I value that control.
mm,
But the frenzy does open things up. So, like the presence of a frenzy piece means that opponents need to be more cautious on the sidelines,
mm,
which means that the sidelines are a little bit more open. And when you don't have that tree man, you have an extra body that can maneuver down the sidelines. All of a sudden, that maybe helps open things up. So, I think there's a lot of the frenzy is always a threat,
mm,
and it's something that certainly needs to be considered. I think the caliber of coaches at EUROBOWL will certainly um, are familiar with that threat for sure.
mm,
But nevertheless, the presence of that threat in and of itself changes the way that other people play or have to position,
mm, mm.
especially in potentially in critical moments. So.
Yeah. Um, but yeah, we'll be watching with interest to see how he does. I I'm not much of a wood elf coach myself. Like if I am playing an elf, I am probably playing a dark elf. So and
Mhm.
even like before the changes that they made in Blood Bowl 2020, I felt that like wood elves were probably my worst elf team out of the four of them. So I have not like and like back in those days, like almost nobody ran the tree, I think. So I can certainly see the value in not having that one piece that can just like, especially with the if it takes root at a bad time, and then your opponent is simply just gonna leave it like sitting there, and
Mhm.
it's not gonna have any impact on the drive at all. So I can certainly see the merits of not having that. But I can also certainly obviously see the merits of, well, it's strength 6. It has very high armor value. It like if you're facing off against a team that can't really get away from the tree very easily, then there is always the like tying down a couple of like pieces, it
Mhm.
can be quite good. But
Yeah,
um,
not to mention the cheeky mighty blow that,
mm,
you pick off one player, even, and then all of a sudden with some, like, the rest of your bodies that are highly agile,
mm,
can move, one body off the opponent's side is oftentimes enough to give you, let you as a Wood Elf player do whatever you want. So there's certainly some advantages there. But
mm,
Frenzy also poses that threat, right?
yeah,
You surf one player, and even if just go straight to the reserve box again, you're guaranteed. It's like a guaranteed off the pitch, right?
yeah,
So
yeah.
anything that can shift those numbers, and if you're playing lower numbers, that generally, like both sides with lower numbers,
Mm,
that generally benefits the team with the higher speed and higher mobility, and that oftentimes is what helps. So.
yeah. Enough. All right. Next up, last of the Elven coaches, we have Drakenspear,
Mhm.
playing
Yeah. So
as high elves, and four rerolls all like immediately catches my attention, as well as like you have gone up for the doubling up on the skills.
yeah, yeah. So, well, Jack and Spear is so he's got a blog which I think a lot of people have kind of read. He's posted it a number
Mm,
of times on, like, the Blood Bowl community on Facebook, as well as in various other points. He's been a guest on the Eye of Nuffle podcast, which
mm,
I'll talk about in a bit more probably later. But a number of times, kind of giving some strategic tactical advice and looking into as well as some of the different um, win percentages of different teams and how those change over time, and different things. He also what did attend the last World Cup,
mm,
so he was there as well, and certainly also at the Immortal Cup. He's a very strong coach out of Canada, and in Ontario and Ottawa.
mm,
And yeah, he was actually going to be our Underworld coach
mm,
for a while going in there. He had a phenomenal record with Underworld, and he had a very unique style of play with Underworld, which was not, kind of, I guess, so standard.
mm,
And with the changes to swarming, it just kind of made us a bit hesitant that there was too many unknowns, and that we didn't feel like there would necessarily be enough time to, like, properly play test that out.
mm,
And so we kind of decided to shy away from Underworld at that point. Um, and there were a number of different teams that he was looking at, and then
mm,
in the end of the day, the team that he felt the most comfortable with that was available was High Elf. So it's a team he's had some success with, and after he's playing around with some different builds, one thing that this build kind of affords is you have quite a bit of combat skills. So you
mm,
have the block on the two blitzers, you got a block, a wrestle on the catcher, but you also still have quite a few dodge pieces. So you have the five kind of dodge players, and so you got dodge and block/dodge on four, like Lodge or Raj or whatever, on four players. So you got quite a few threats that are a bit of a pain to deal with. And the four rerolls gives you the ability to play aggressive, and it means that you can kind of push the envelope at times when the play is there, but maybe it's not, like, your highest of probable play. But if you're willing to invest a reroll or two into it, then all of a sudden that becomes a very viable threat.
mm,
And it kind of, in addition to kind of a lot of those built-in skills, I think it gives the capability or the possibility of playing a bit aggressively. Um, yeah, so I think that's something that he valued.
mm. Yeah, it is definitely the I feel in a tournament setting, especially it is the high elf catchers, I think, that make or break the success of a high elf team. And uh putting, like, with the dodge reroll already there and the four rerolls to back it up, like, since you can use multiple rerolls in a turn now, like, you can go for those. Like, maybe you'll have to dodge through some like more tackle zones that you might normally be comfortable with, but it might end up with you getting a sack on the ball carrier. And I can certainly see that, like, if you're the sort of coach who's willing to take those chances, having that fourth reroll in there to sort of like give you that leeway it can be very very good for you.
Yeah, he's someone who's very good with the numbers, and
Mm.
he'll take appropriate calculated risks. And um, I think the four rerolls allows him the luxury of being able to do so.
Mm-mm. So far, I believe we have only seen, we haven't seen too many high elves. It's definitely dark elves, the most popular
Mhm.
of the elves, and then wood elves, then high elves, and so far we have not come across any elven unions on the rosters that we've taken a look at. Um, from what I've heard of, like talk to like the Swedish national team members, for example, like they've been like kind of down on high elves as a sort of team. Whereas like with my interview with the Welsh team, they were very sort of confident in their ability, like as they have a high elf team in the roster as well. So where would you say that like high elves sort of fall on that sort of spectrum of team?
Mhm. Well, so what we had done is we kind of classified the different teams in terms of like, let's call them the must takes of
Mm.
like, these are great builds, and then we have ones that were like very good builds. And our high elf, our kind of our assessment of high elves were that they were very, very playable.
Mm.
Um, that, they're maybe not your top meta pick or anything like that, but like they have quite a few strengths. They don't have too many weaknesses
Mm.
in this kind of structure here, and we felt them to be a totally reasonable selection. And it wasn't a surprise to us when we looked at the overall kind of what was selected the most by
Mm.
all the different countries, and we saw that um, I think we had like seven of our choices were in the top nine,
Mm. Mm.
and High Elf was obviously the one that was not. So that didn't really come as a surprise to us because um, we expected that High Elves would probably not be a super high uh, common pick,
Mm.
but we're confident in Drakenspear's ability to play them to a high level.
All right, and that is generally all that counts. I think is that because it does very much, I feel, come down to like I'd rather if I was a T captain, like I would rather have a coach that is comfortable and confident with the team that they're playing, even if the team was like maybe not the top meta pick, versus having them play something that is the top meta pick, but they may be may a little bit unsure of or haven't had that much experience with. I'd much prefer to give them that comfort, like and see them at their best.
Mhm, mhm.
All right. Moving on from the elves, but still quite dodgy. We have J-Rock 56 Amazons.
Yeah, so J-Rock's also from the Ottawa area.
Mm.
He's got quite a bit of experience. I think he was at least three, maybe four World Cups. So
Mm.
he's been to quite a few, and so he's currently played quite a bit internationally. He's played a lot, obviously, in the local scene, and he's got a number of teams that he plays at a high level. So he ended up with Amazons here, and yeah, so he's someone who's very familiar with kind of international style Blood Bowl. He's also familiar with Amazons.
Mm.
I think in terms of the build itself, in terms of the team makeup, I think it's 14 players and an apothecary, three rerolls.
Yep.
I think I imagine that's pretty much what most people had selected because actually, I guess a lot of people would maybe work in the bribe, but that is a build kind of structure that we quite liked.
Mm.
Um, and then specifically taking the leader on the thrower
Mm.
to kind of give you that fourth kind of reroll.
Mm.
Um, I felt like we felt that really kind of opened things up for the team in a sense because one challenge with playing Amazons, especially if you go double guard on the blockers,
Mm.
is that you don't really you're oftentimes in positions where you want to be throwing some blocks with them, but they're a little bit less reliable. And with that extra kind of reroll in play, it kind of gives you a little bit more of a buffer to be able to say, I'm going to throw a block with this blocker, and I can feel confident that I'm probably not going to block skull out.
Yep.
It means that, on that turn where, I really need this guy to do 2 dodges for me.
Mm.
You kind of have a potential reroll for both of them,
Yep.
right? And not that you want to be 3+ dodging all over the place, but again, it kind of gives you that extra layer of security with what you're hoping to not have to do too much.
Mm.
Um, and the one kind of thing that was a bit, I guess, of a fringe pick, and I think that was kind of highlighted as well in some of the other teams, is the frenzy on the line woman,
Yep.
which again, not a common pick, but similar thought process to, I guess, some of the other frenzy. Actually, you'll notice the theme that there's actually quite a bit of frenzy
Mm.
on a lot of these teams here, but is it does kind of help spread the field. And especially again with that extra reroll, it's a piece that has a legitimate threat that
Mm.
that needs to be kind of taken into account. So that's a choice that he felt comfortable with, and yeah, the double block on the blitzers I think is a very good. Personally, I like that a lot. And with this build, he took the extra skill.
Yep. I believe the extra skill is generally been the like what the Amazons have been getting in a lot of team rosters. There most of the sort of differences that we've been seeing have been there have been some advocates for either one or potentially even both of the blockers having block rather than the guard, because again that's a
Mm-hmm.
bludgeoning strength 4 piece, which can be very very strong. And there have certainly been teams where one of the blitzers has had wrestle rather than block, just to give you that like both options essentially blitzers. But I am like obviously I'm like the new Amazons are I've never played the new Amazons, but from like just from a theoretical standpoint, I do all like I think I would agree with this roster so far the most out of all of the Amazon rosters that I've seen. Like I like the addition of that frenzy in there, for the like just that additional sideline threat, just that additional like this might be suddenly pushing you out of the position that you would normally be safe at, because I will get that
Mm-hmm.
second block in. And like the 2 guard I feel are a necessity for how I see Amazons, like how they would like play in my mind at the very least. Like I think 1 guard is too little, and no guard is going to be very like that's going to be end up very poorly, I think, for Amazon.
Yeah. I think well, I think the guard on the blockers is so strong,
Mm.
especially combined with defensive.
Yeah.
Like it does oftentimes force your opponent to have to start their turn with a 1 die block to try and hopefully get something going.
Mm.
And like if that goes poorly, like it could just be lights out.
Yeah.
Um, certainly, like I've seen 1 block 1 guard, and I think it can be very effective.
Mm.
Having the one only the 1 guard, it kind of means you have to be extra careful with it a little bit, because
Yeah.
you lose it, all of a sudden that can be really tough. And there's sometimes you just want to have you, you need the guard is just so valuable.
Mm.
In terms of the blitzers, the wrestle, it's hard to argue with it when you look at the fact that it kind of helps with or kind of plays very nicely with the jump up and,
Yeah.
and whatnot. And the 7 movement, you get good field coverage.
Yeah.
So you can kind of, if you're going to have one safety to kind of cover the field on defense, you definitely get that. Personally, I find the block really allows you to leverage the hit and run.
Mm.
And because it means that even when let's say you're blitzing or whatever, and you roll block skulls, instead of you going down on the ground, you can step away without having to roll a dodge and continue moving.
Yeah.
And just that kind of capability really can open up so much. So personally, I find the block on them just so valuable. But certainly, like I played with them at a Moracle, and I played 1 block 1 wrestle, and it
Mm.
worked well. But I definitely wished I had 2 block.
Uh-huh. All right. Moving on. Still in the Lustria region. We have Miracle. Miracle.
Yeah, Miracle.
Uh,
So Miracle,
yeah.
yeah. So Miracle is actually one of the hosts of the Eye of Knuckle podcast that I had kind
Mm-hmm.
of
Yeah, mentioned
alluded
before.
to earlier. So for those that would be familiar with that, and for those that aren't, you should go check it out. But he's one of the hosts of that podcast that kind of covers the tournament scene in the Ontario and Quebec region primarily,
Mm-hmm.
that kind of glam region. And his first exposure to International Blood Bowl was also at the last World Cup, where he took Lizardmen with almost the exact same build and had done very, very well there. And so he's back at it again with a pretty standard 6 block Lizardman build to hopefully do the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah, the Danish captain in particular called this the second best Lizardman build. His own team had the best Lizardman build out of like in the entire world. So we'll see if maybe if you match up against the Danish, see how that goes. Like which turns out to be true. I do see like the one thing that I've seen a lot is that instead of having the assistant like the one assistant coach, a lot
Hmm.
of people have had rather a chameleon skink rather than just one more regular skink. Um, and a lot of people think that like
Hmm.
the skills that come with the chameleon, like on the ball specifically on the chameleon skink, like it pays itself to like for 10k, it is a worthy get. Is there any particular reason, uh, like why?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, he certainly play tested both and looked into both, and it's true for 10K. You do gain on the ball is lovely, and you do gain some, the shadowing, which doesn't come up all that often, but
Hmm.
when it does, can be valuable.
Hmm.
But the main thing is that you lose them one movement,
Yeah.
and based on his play testing, he just kind of felt like more often than not that one movement was more valuable than the other skills.
Yeah.
And so, the extra coach is sure it gives you another chance at a reroll, or maybe to deny your opponent a reroll.
Hmm.
But primarily, he valued the extra movement point higher than the combination of those two skills.
Yeah. No, and I can certainly see an argument like going either way. Certainly, I think comes down to like coach preference here. Um, One of the things that I personally have liked seeing in rosters is an addition of a guard, and I like whether it's on a SARS blocker or a Croxigore, and I'm sure that's probably something that he also play tested.
Hmm.
But yeah, like the 6 block on the SARS, it just makes them that much more reliable, and reliable is what you want your SARS generally to. I can understand not having the guard, even though I think like not having any guard piece does make like the more bashy matchups slightly harder for Lizardmen. But then you have 6 strength 4 pieces and a strength 5 piece in the Croxigore. You
Hmm.
might just overpower them anyway. Um, there is the question of like Taurus with tackle. Was that ever a consideration?
Miracle is a big believer in the 6 block.
Hmm.
So he's play tested like leading up to World Cup. He play tested quite a bit,
Hmm.
and his kind of general conclusion was if you can take the 6 block on the source, you just take the 6 block on the source. So that's kind of the camp that he comes from.
Hmm.
And like I said, he's played them at a very high level for the last couple years. So I'm not going to argue with him on that front.
Yeah. Yeah. Fair enough. All right, and again, definitely nothing wrong with the like the Lizardman team is like generally whatever skill variation you do end up picking with, like the Lizardman team is going to be a very stable as teams do go. All right,
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
yeah, this one I think I'm gonna need a little bit help on the name because I would pronounce this as Runki Krum.
I think that's right. Runky Crump. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Fair enough. Certainly, sort of jumps out of like out of all of the names here. Certainly sounds up as the most sort of unique, I guess you could say. And he's playing some orcs, and
Yeah.
a thing like his orc roster certainly looks different than many other orc rosters we've seen before. So he's got a troll in there, and he has even put guard on the troll. and instead of having 3 skills on the blitzer,
Hmm.
which is normally there's a guard blitzer, there's a tackle blitzer, there's a mighty blow blitzer. He instead has sure hands and tackle on blitzer, and then 3 block, 1 guard on big and blockers. No
Yeah.
thrower but to be seen, which is to be expected with the sure hands on the blitzer, and then 2 goblins, 3 rerolls. So yeah, um this is definitely again one of those where like this a lot of skills are the same as we've seen before, but like the sure hands blitzer
Hmm.
and the guard on the troll, that I would like to open up that a little bit.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, so I think maybe there's a bit of a history for this kind of particular, not exactly this build, but I played orcs at World Cup,
Mm,
and the team makeup was not exactly this because the build was 1150 instead
yeah,
of 1160.
yeah,
So I had the only one goblin, I had the thrower, and I had only one orc lineman, and but with this build, you kind of get an extra skill and you get an extra 10k.
yeah.
And that extra 10k kind of allows you to get if you're willing to drop that thrower
Mm,
and turn one of your orc blitzers into a sure-handed player, you can get a second goblin. So that gets you to 13 bodies,
yeah,
um, which that was one thing that I felt was like the weakness of my World Cup orc team was that I had 12 bodies only, and when people start fouling, and if you go down, you could potentially go down in numbers. So
mm,
having that extra 13th body was kind of really valuable, and so that was kind of I think maybe part of that genesis of that. He kind of play tested a number of different orc options.
mm,
The 3 block 1 guard for the blockers are the biggins
mm,
is certainly interesting. When I played them, I played 2 block 2 guard,
yeah,
and they were great. I mean, that's I think like hard to argue with. But I did find that oftentimes my opponent's first action was a 1 die block against the guard biggin,
yeah,
and just like 50% of the time he was going down.
yeah,
And you'd get them in positions where they're like, I got nothing but to throw this 1 die block and then this 1 die block. Oh, and now everything opens up.
yeah,
And so going with 3 block on the big ends kind of helps maybe counter that a little bit.
mm,
You're maybe a little less willing to throw that 1 die block against the block piece as
mm,
opposed to some of the guards. It's still kind of important, I think, to have at least 2 guards on the orcs.
yeah,
Certainly putting it on the orc blitzer would have been a probably more standard choice.
mm,
But he was playtesting with regards to the troll and just tossing that troll in a good spot and 5 strength and helping everybody else around him out. He felt that was a good balance that he was happy with,
mm,
and so it allows him to take the 3 block biggins, and that all of a sudden now you've got your 5 players above 4 strength, 3 of which that are hitting with block, and 2 of them that are given guard support. So you got some good meat on that kind of front line.
mm,
The sure-handed blitzer is really more about getting that 6 movement player
yeah,
as opposed to the thrower that comes in with 5.
mm,
Certainly, there are I think there's builds as well that take the thrower and then just leverage the extra skill as a mighty blow and a guard or something like that on the blitzers.
mm,
I play tested the sure-handed orc blitzer in the Super League and did very very well with it myself.
mm,
The rest of it was a little bit different, but the overall team structure was roughly the same.
mm,
Um, and so I think it gives you that ability to stretch the field a little bit faster.
mm,
So those 4 turn drives or whatnot, all of a sudden you have a little bit more movement. You can kind of get where you need to go a little bit better with the 6 movements. And so, and sure hands as well, like as part of the meta choice, like there's a lot of races that that could easily come with strip ball
mm,
between your maybe like your Norse that would have it versus like your Wood Elves versus your Skavens, potential vampires. There's a lot of teams that can come into play that have that strip ball threat.
mm,
And certainly as orcs, you want to have some sort of sure-handed, reliable ball pickup. So if you're not going to take the thrower, I think you kind of need to put it on an orc blitzer.
mm,
I know people that wouldn't. and they just trust the fact that they'll pick up the ball eventually. But somehow, like my feeling, and I think from our discussions, like just getting that ball security in terms of just picking it up and then knowing that you have the sure hands, especially also for those matchups against teams that that don't have or that do have some strip ball. You have some extra defense against that. And not to mention that defensively, like if you do get that ball loose, he can jump in there and pick it up on a 4+ with reasonable odds with sure hands, for example. And that might be the turning point in the game where he hops into a tackle zone, picks it up on a 4+ with a built-in reroll on a 75% chance, and then he dodges out maybe with a team reroll for almost 90% chance, and all of a sudden you've stolen the ball and you've gotten away, and that could be the turning point in the game, right? So there's a lot of advantages potentially to the sure hands, but certainly I think one thing that when I look at the roster that where I feel like it can be a little bit lacking is certainly the lack of a mighty blow.
Yeah.
And that was something that I had found was a really important choice because it really helped against those teams that I felt were the lowered armored teams that were fouling with dirty players and things like that, where it kind of allowed you to keep pace with them a little bit better.
Yeah.
So that would be the only thing that from my own standpoint personally, but he feels very comfortable with the team and with that particular build, and yeah, and I think we're hopeful that things will go well.
Yeah, like coming back a little bit to the sure hands is that like you mentioned how useful the sure hands could be in a situation where you get the ball loose and now you have a decent odds of getting a pickup on it and then dodging away even in a tackle zone. But the flip side of that is obviously that like for orcs, if you don't have that sure hands, like then like orcs are probably one of the teams that might be like the hardest hit if somebody comes with strip ball and like pops that ball loose, even if you can recover it like immediately afterwards. Like just
Mm-hmm.
that extra delay for orcs could be catastrophic for their drive.
Yeah, and also the combination of block and sure hands
Yeah.
on that ball carrier, for example, it when someone's, let's say, jumping into your cage or something like that, or maybe you have to expose a hit because of just how the situation's kind of unfolded.
Mm.
Like certainly having the block and the sure hands gives you some extra security there.
Yeah.
And yeah, like you said, especially some of these teams that can legitimately hop into a cage, whether it's Slan or whether it's Wood Elves or whether it's a Skaven dumping in there or
Yeah.
vampires that are opening it up. There's a number of strong teams that can get in there and can get a hit on your ball,
Yeah.
and that may very reasonably have strip ball on them.
Yeah. All right.
Mhm.
Coming up next, yours truly. We have you're on Necromantic Horror, one of the considered, I think, to be one of the as like insta lock-in teams from like the meta standpoint. I feel, um,
Mhm.
and yeah, you're like looking at this. We do have the sure hands popping out once again, which I don't think we've seen. I don't
Mhm.
remember seeing it on any other Necro team so far, but other than that,
Mhm. Mhm.
like looking very solid. And I think we've discussed sure hands well enough to understand your reasoning on why you felt it was necessary on the
Mhm.
Ghoul Runner. And I do like the like I think calling it the correct choice on to have the double guard on the flesh golem, it's certainly the choice that I would go to. But like there have been people who have advocating for like one guard, one block, especially like since since you already have the two guard on the race. And there has been at least one roster so far where both flesh golems had a block instead of guard.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, how do you feel about that in particular? In the because like Flesh Golems is one of those guard players, um, that can get kind of stuck, and then
Mhm.
unlike say for like a mummy in an undead team, like they're only strength 4, which means that like they like if somebody sticks something like a biggin next to a Flesh Golem, like especially a biggin with block, that could be pretty unfortunate.
Mhm. Yeah. I mean, it's certainly an interesting consideration.
Mm,
I'd say classically, I had played with one block, one guard on the golems, and then I started play testing with the four guards, and I haven't gone back since. Um, and there were a lot of times that I really liked having the block golem because I found sometimes like you just get him to a good square,
mm,
and people are just too scared to try and block him off or blitz him off
mm,
because there's too many outcomes that are just not what they would want, and you're forcing a dodge in some situations and stuff like that. The guard choice, uh, I think one certainly, I think a big factor of the team is the ability to kind of control the pitch
mm.
in terms of having the stand firm and the sidestep. And adding the four guards in there just kind of makes really plays into that a little bit. I find it also makes the wolves a lot stronger. So the presence of the extra guard, and sometimes depending on how the game's unfolded, you might have an extra body of guard on an extra, like, more coverage across the field, and that kind of can allow the wolves to be more effective. Um, I think the one place, so I think my build here is actually very non-standard. I had been looking at a build that was using the extra cash and gets you to like 12 bodies
Mm,
and three rerolls.
yep.
And I play tested that quite a bit, and I had quite a bit of success with it. But I was noticing a pattern in games that I lost or games that I felt like didn't go the way that I ought to have, and maybe I got a tie and I felt like I should have won the game or something like that.
Mm,
Uh, I noticed two common themes, and one was when I felt like for whatever reason, I had too many bodies that I lost based on knockouts or casualty that just didn't come back. And with only 12 bodies, like I was sometimes feeling like I was playing at 9 or 10 players for the second half or something.
mm,
And like if I just had one more body, like even a zombie, like all of a sudden, like I think I have a much more dominant defensive position or whatever it might be. So I kind of didn't love just the 12 bodies.
mm, mm.
Um, and I also felt that there were a couple of matches that I played where like for whatever reason, and sometimes the low number of games like that just happens where I just failed the ball pickup too many turns in a row.
Mm, mm.
3, 4 turns in a row, and as much as you try to protect for that, it just at some point it kind of smothers you, and the ball bounces in an awkward spot, and then like all of a sudden it's a turnover, and then like it's just a different game, right?
Yeah.
So the two things that I kind of felt that were my weaknesses with the build that I had been playing with was one, the attrition, and
Mm,
two was the ball security side. And at some point, like you're certainly investing rerolls in picking up the ball. So
yeah.
I certainly felt like I wanted that sure-handed ghoul, or with this build, which would give me the 13th body, which
Mm,
I valued, and but leaves me with only two rerolls. So once I had two rerolls, I really felt I needed the sure hands,
yep.
because I don't have rerolls to spare. And the two rerolls, I think to some extent it would have been easy to justify switching like a golem over to a block, maybe a block and a guard, maybe two block even, because you're low on rerolls, right?
Mm,
So that's the one area where I think um, you know there's some danger, if you will, by
mm,
playing with only the two rerolls. But by putting sure hands on one ghoul, I felt like it justified me selecting the other ghoul as a wrestle ghoul.
mm,
Whereas in some of the other builds where you were doing 12 bodies and three rerolls and you only have 7 skills to give,
mm.
it's hard to justify giving a wrestle to the ghoul instead of like a block.
Yeah. Yep.
And so in that case, you're giving a block to the ghoul, and oftentimes you're either going double block on the werewolves and just playing with no wrestle, or you're doing a block werewolf and a wrestle werewolf. And personally, I just found that the two block werewolves with the wrestle ghoul was just kind of fit better.
Mm,
Especially when you're playing a good player, sometimes you make a great play and you give yourself an opening at a shot at the ball, and sometimes you need a dodge to get in there to get
mm,
that 2 die hit on the ball, or maybe it's a 1 die hit on the ball or something.
yep.
And I'd rather that ghoul with the dodge skill be making that dodge than a werewolf, for example.
Yeah.
So that was kind of something where I felt like that kind of opened up that opportunity. And it's I think that four guards should hopefully give people a hard time. The double frenzy with block again combined with the four guards should hopefully give people a hard time. I think the sure hands should hopefully alleviate any ball ball control issues, and certainly defend against that strip as well. And the wrestler should hopefully kind of present as a bit of a better sacker, and I have some built-in kind of resilience in terms of attrition from the linemen. I think the only thing that kind of adds to that kind of question mark is the 2 rerolls, and if you have one of those games where you're just rolling some really unfortunate dice, that could be a potential danger point. But yeah.
All right. We have Setasak once again in the chat. Canada feels the only frenzy zone line woman and the only sure hands orc blitzer. Creative roster building and well explained. Thinking out of the box.
Thank you.
I'm sure the Canadian team will appreciates the praise. And again, it is one of those things where, like, if you're playing like a little bit like rosters that are like not the norm, there is certainly always that that people aren't maybe expecting it. They aren't exactly sure how to deal with it. Like, especially with the frenzy, like Amazon line woman being, I think, the perfect example of that. Is that, like, most people would consider that maybe a too risky a proposition, like just a frenzy line woman, right?
Mhm.
But yeah, will be very interesting to see like how it pans out for you guys. But yeah, I do have to, like, I agree with you that, like, I'm personally, like, regardless of kind of like what team that I play, I always kind of, I feel a little bit uneasy if I only have the two rerolls, and especially when you
Mhm.
do have the 2 like frenzy werewolves in particular, because like we all know that frenzy can sometimes bite you in the ass. So like, but yeah, like, otherwise, like, I do very much understand like the reasoning behind this team, and like the sure hands is one of those where some people like for example, again, like the Swedish coaches, like, they generally like would say that sure hands is a luxury, like, that surely you're gonna pick up the ball without it, and just rather have like a block on the ghoul who's designated to go like go and pick up the ball anyway, because
Mhm.
then he's less fragile in general. But yeah, I can the sure hands is, it is one of those things that I have been like, there have been too many times where I have had like 2 people in the backfield, and I've gone like, all right, I just need to make this 3+ pickup. But all right, I didn't make it. Don't want to use a reroll. And then next turn, same thing, and then suddenly the enemy's already like creeping closer, putting that pressure on you, and then you're really starting to sweat. So,
Yep. Yeah,
all
for sure.
right.
And yeah, I think that sums it up pretty well for me, anyways. Yeah.
All right. Last but not least, Warpstone, playing as Skaven. Very, very fitting
Mhm.
for the coach name, certainly.
Yeah.
But a very different, in like a Skaven roster, no tackle to be found on either of the blitzers, and instead of the Juggernaut, which is often seen on the Rat Ogre, he's gone for the block. I have
Mhm.
like that. I believe, like, obviously it makes sense. Is that if you're like, now the Rat Ogre is like absolutely the designated blitzing piece, which means that like having the 2 guard on the blitzer instead of like guard tackle, which I think is the norm. Um, it like just to give him that like extra help if he needs it, certainly makes sense. Does mean that let's see, block, wrestle, sidestep, so there's no strip ball gutter runner to be found here.
Correct. Yeah.
Oh.
That's, I mean, that as well as the lack of a tackle,
Yeah.
for sure, are maybe the 2 things that people would point out, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, Warpstone is a coach out from BC as well.
Mm.
So uh, he's won a couple of the Spike major a few times, and very very strong player. He is all well. It's going to be his first experience with international at an international Blood Bowl tournament.
Mm.
Um, so it'll be a good experience for him there. In terms of the roster, so I think like I think there's a few different spots where you kind of have to make some decisions with Skaven. One big one is always the Rat Ogre, as you mentioned,
Yeah.
because it's the block versus the Juggernaut, the block costing you an extra skill on somebody else, the Juggernaut playing so nicely with the one turn attempt,
Mm.
for example. So there's a lot of times that I think that a lot of people are very happy to play that with the Juggernaut. I think the thought process with the block, and personally, when I play Skaven, I tend to prefer the block on the Rat Ogre myself.
Mm.
It just helps with turn ordering. And what I mean by that is there's oftentimes that you just don't want to be like sometimes you want to throw a block with a Rat Ogre. And maybe that is you just need, let's say, 2 pushes or something, and that opens up a lane for somebody to go run in and blitz the ball carrier or something like that.
Mm.
And when you have Juggernaut on him and no block, that's a scary 2-die block to throw. Whereas when you got block on him, it's a heck of a lot safer. So sometimes it can create situations where now you're more comfortable to um, not just wait for your last action for the Rat Ogre to make his hit, but you're saying, you know what, I'm going to start my turn or somewhat early on in my turn, and I'm going to let the Rat Ogre do his thing, and he's just not going to roll double skulls, and I'll be okay. And that kind of can really open up some big play upside potentially if you're willing to accept that level of risk.
Mm.
Which maybe you wouldn't be willing to do, for example, with if you had Juggernaut.
Mm.
Certainly with Juggernaut, you're kind of accepting the fact that he's going to be blitzing when he's going to be hitting more often than not.
Yep.
And that even if he's going to be blitzing with the blocks with block, that actually also is an advantage in a lot of cases, right? If you're blitzing a target that doesn't have block, all of a sudden that's one more die where the opponent goes down. So like whereas Juggernaut, like it protects you from the block skull, but with the block skull, that's also an offensive threat. So
Mm.
there are some good play for it. It also helps defensively when
Mm.
people do target your Rat Ogre.
Mm.
That one die hit on the Rat Ogre is not quite as scary if they muster it. Maybe they're less willing to even invest in targeting the Rat Ogre because he's got block and it might require too many resources to try and hit him. So that in and of itself can help his longevity.
Mm.
And helps him, standing there, being relevant. So there's a number of good reasons why I think block can be really, really strong on the Rat Ogre.
Mm.
Um, the double guard on the Skaven Blitzer is certainly an interesting one. I mean, I know a lot of times I've seen, guard mighty blow, guard tackle for sure. The double guard, like when you're, a strong player that's good with guard placement, having even one guard can be really, really, effective.
Mm.
When you have a second, and you can oftentimes do some really nasty things, and that also helps make those gutter runners stronger, right? So if you got 2 guards in play and a wrestle gutter runner, all of a sudden you can get him some support,
Mm.
or a block gutter runner, for example, if he's blitzing.
Mm.
So there's a number of times where I think that can kind of help make the gutter runners better. Certainly there's an argument to be made that if you're playing Skaven and you're playing, you have access to these blitzers that have access to strength skills,
Mm.
that you might as well take the strength skill. Otherwise, you might as well just play elves.
Mm.
And so I think because otherwise you have all these line rats that can't dodge,
Mm.
but what your real advantage is that you have access to some of these strength skills,
Mm.
and so I think that's somewhere that the double guard kind of plays into that. Could be guard mighty blow, could be guard tackle for sure, and the sidestep gutter runner, I think, I mean, those guys are always a threat. Those
Mm.
guys are always annoying as hell and scary. They open up uses of the sidelines when you're kind of down numbers. They certainly are a threat for the one turn touchdown.
Mm.
Maybe less so as than when they're combined with a Juggernaut Rat Ogre.
Mm.
But Warpstone's not playing to win the game because of a one turn touchdown.
Mm.
That if that's in the cards and that's available, then he'll happily win the game with that. But
Mm.
that's not the style of play where you just decide to hide your entire team and then pull off a one-turn touchdown and then win on your drive.
But yeah, the one thing that sort of like you brought up, like having the 2 guards means that like a gutter runner blitz, like on the ball carrier, like it makes it more reliable. You can get that extra help that you might want in there. which is like one of the sort of like I get that reasoning, which is also why I'm like slightly surprised that there is no strip ball to add on the roster, because I figured that like a strip ball gutter runner would work like extremely well with the two guard blitzer
Mhm.
choice.
Yeah, I think it. I think it would. I mean, I think the spot where the strip ball could be is in place of the sidestep. So
Yeah.
that I think is like if you're going to be going that route with that stuff, I think that's where decision has to be made in that sense. And from from the playtesting that he had done, he quite was quite fond of the sidestep.
Mm,
Um, you know, certainly in cases where you maybe couldn't fit a full, cage, and you're kind of using the sidelines in creative ways. Like there was a number of situations where he felt that the sidestep provided good value. And yeah, certainly no strip ball. Yeah.
all right. Yeah, definitely. Like, it is nice, like having gone through like all of these interviews and having taken a look at all of the rosters. It is nice to see that like even like even if like some of the differences between like the team like the choices that they made regarding like skills and such, like even if they are kind of small, there's always like a well thought out like reason behind it, and like you can always the sort of like the idea behind those choices as well, in that like there's no, oh, I didn't really know what to do with this, so I just did that. Like there's nothing of that sort on like this high of a level of play field. The one thing that I did want to ask you about is that that like one of the what I would consider like very strong teams is the vampire team, and you do not have that
Mhm.
on the roster. Is there like is there a specific reason for that, or is it just a case of like you just didn't have a coach that felt like comfortable playing them?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very good vampire build. I think there's a lot of good options. We did have some people that had play tested that.
Mm,
We valued kind of builds like or races, for example, like Amazons and Orcs, and a little bit higher Skaven, for example, as a bit higher. And in the end of the day, when we had a bit of shuffling going on in terms of the races towards the end, um, vampires ended up kind of being the odd one out.
mm,
Um, and so, certainly when our feelings of vampires was that they were a huge high potential team,
mm,
but they also had that capability of just self-destructing.
mm,
And we kind of felt that, for example, like a team like an Amazon or like an Orc might be more capable of kind of getting a hard draw versus like a team that just self destructs. So they might have potentially a higher upside, but we were a little bit worried about the variation or the variability there.
mm, mm,
It wasn't that we specifically stayed away from them. I think in the end of the day, it came down to coach's preference.
mm.
And I think vampires we would have been very happy to have included. But based on the final kind of shuffling that we ended up having, it kind of created a situation where vampires were the odd one out.
Yep, fair enough. I do also very much agree in that, like, personally, I don't like. I'm not much of a vampire coach, just because of that fact that, like, I mean, I like some days I do feel like that, like, like my luck is such that were I to like open up a cemetery, people would just stop dying, and like. So I can't trust myself to make like, especially in those like high intensity situations, like just having that extra bit of failure chance with like, does he bloodlust now, is not like something that I want to, like, I feel very comfortable with, personally. So, but yeah, so with all of the roster now done, let's talk a little bit about what you are hoping to sort of achieve in the Euro Bowl. Like, what sort of a placement are you looking for, or would feel happy with like achieving, as well as like if you have any particular teams that you're going to be wishing to come up with, whether because you have maybe not a grudge, but like, rivalry with, or potentially like something that you think that you can learn from, by going up against them.
Yeah, so I mean, we don't have any particular targets.
Mm,
With this being our first EuroBowl, we're happy to be participating, and our objective is to come in and hopefully pick up a couple wins.
mm,
To compete in all of our rounds is would be ideal,
mm,
and to get some international experience to those that hadn't played against that style yet. So. Um, there's a lot of really strong European players. I think we have a lot of strong players in Canada and I'd say North America in general. We've had a lot of experience playing against a number of the Americans as well.
mm,
So we're hopeful that we will end up with a reasonable finish. We don't really know what that would look like,
mm,
but certainly we're hoping to do well
mm,
and that we can come out of here with our heads held high, knowing that we've done our best and that we've given some strong teams a run for their money and maybe even kind of surprised a few people. So that'd be great. Um, there's not really any particular teams that were chomping at the bit to play versus to not play or anything like that. We're
mm,
happy
mm.
to play against whoever's in front of us, and I think it'll be a great experience for our coaches regardless. If anything, I'd say we'd rather not have to play the Americans because we play them often enough.
Yeah,
As
yeah.
we come all the way over to Europe, it'd be nice to play some Europeans. But we've played some trial matches against the Americans. We're very familiar with each other's um, some of our teams and some of our matches. Like a number of us have played against each other
Mm,
a number of times. So if we do play with them, then well, so be it.
mhm,
But in any case. Yeah, we're focused on one opponent at a time right now,
mm.
and so I guess that might be leads into the next segment. But yeah.
Yeah. It is definitely a good lead up to the next segment, as we are going to. Obviously, we're all hoping that you're going to have a great time, regardless of who you face here, and I hope you're going to be able to pick up some tips and tricks from all of your opponents, and otherwise just have a good time. But speaking of your opponents, your first round draw is the Polish team, and there's there's actually quite a few teams on, like, just looking at the teams themselves. There's actually quite a few teams that are not so popular among their rosters here.
Mhm.
Um, so first off, we have Do the Mario, who is playing the only Imperial nobility in the tournament. And
Mhm.
so certainly, one of the odd men out, shall we say, in that regard. I'm personally, like, I am an Imperial Nobility coach. Like, they are my favorite team as of currently. But I do also recognize that they're definitely one of those, like, not even it's not a meta pick team, but rather like, this is maybe slightly too weak of a team, like, just overall, and like,
Mhm.
they might need a little bit of, like, boosting up just a bit to, like, be able to even, like, compete at the very highest level. um
Mhm.
so looking at his roster here, he has gone for a block on the ogre, just like 4 guards on the bodyguard, because I mean, a bodyguard with guard is just a complete piece. He has tackle on a blitzer, dodge on a blitzer. He has a block thrower, a leader thrower, then 4 linemen, 1 assistant coach, 2 reroll. So he's gone
Mhm.
for um personal, like, my personal thoughts is that, like, putting the block on the ogre, I don't think is worth it, because, like, to me, like, the ogre in an Imperial Nobility team is similar to, like the treeman in a Wood Elf team, is that, like, he's supposed to be like an anchor point that you can sort of rotate the game around. And in that regard, putting a guard on him is my personal choice, because, like, the block, sure, it means that, like, he doesn't go down if somebody blocks him and, like, gets a both down result, but it also means that he needs to be doing the blocking, or he's certainly not as useful.
Mhm.
uh
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, that's certainly a good way to go about it, especially if you're not planning on throwing too many blocks with him.
mm,
Then if you even go in there with 5 guards. I remember playing a Super League match against Triple Skulls Imperial Nobility, where he
Mm.
played 5 guard there with the 4 bodyguards and the ogre, and that was a royal pain to deal
Mm.
with. So certainly, I can appreciate that. That's could be challenging. I think one thing that he did, which is nice, is one of the big weaknesses of the team is their armor,
Mm.
and taking the 2 throwers, which kind of gets you that extra armor
Yeah.
value.
Yeah.
So that gives him a little bit more resilience across the board.
Yeah.
So I think that, and then obviously he can also take on, like, they got so many skills for
Yeah.
Imperial Nobility, so that gives him the ability to take a leader to kind of get that third reroll and kind of be a little bit more cost effective. So I think it's a roster that can be a royal pain to deal with.
Yeah.
He's got a tackle piece, he's got a dodge, a blodge,
Movement
he's
7
got a
piece.
blitzer,
Yeah.
he's got a lot of lock and wrestle across the board. He's got 4 guards, and with all that stand firm and fend, like,
Yeah.
it really is an annoying team to play against.
Yeah.
And it is one that, if you lose a bunch of pieces, then certainly, that can become a very hard match. But if your, armor 9 plus is holding up,
Yeah.
they can be a very, very stout defensive team.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I think my personal experience with them, I found defensively they're very strong.
Mm.
Offensively, you kind of wish you had a few more tools,
Yep.
whether it be to remove a piece or to, like, impose a bit of a threat. And maybe that block on the ogre is gives you the ability to leverage that mighty blow to maybe remove an extra piece here or there, and so maybe that plays into it.
Yeah. So his first round matchup, if I'm not reading this wrong, is going to be your Amazon player, and I feel that Imperial Nobility, like, because of the stand firm and because of the fend, like, especially like with the addition of having a frenzy line one, like, fend and stand firm really kind of shut down like a lot of the utility of that frenzy linewoman. And because, like, the Amazon team is not that, like sure, they have the 2 movement 7 pieces, but now so do the Imperial Nobility. And
Hmm.
so I feel that, like, surprisingly, because, like, Amazon is considered like one of the very, very good, like one of the very good teams, like considered at like top of the meta at the moment, I feel like they might struggle in, like, they I don't think that they're going to struggle, like, I don't think that they're going to struggle in a way that they're going to lose the matchup, but I do think that they are probably going to struggle in the scoring department just because of what you said. The Imperial Nobility defensibility is just so strong.
Yeah, yeah, could be a tough matchup for sure with the tackle, obviously, which is not Amazon's friends.
Mm.
The 4 guard will be interesting because of the 2 guard defensives.
Mm.
So I think that's an interesting matchup to look at. And yeah, I mean, for example, block ogre against AV 8 plus
Mm.
again
Mm.
with the mighty blow. Like, there's a lot of interesting counterplays, and certainly, as you mentioned, the frenzy is maybe less effective between the fend and the stand firm. So
Mm.
yeah, it could be maybe a hard matchup, but I think Adam's up to the challenge. Yeah.
Good to hear that the captain has confidence in coaches. Yeah. Um. All right. Moving on, we have. I will apologize to any Polish listeners and or watchers for if I butcher their names. I believe this is Grzeju. Grzeju. I don't know, but he's playing the Skaven. And
Mhm.
this one is compared to the Skaven team that you're bringing, and this one is a lot more what people would consider orthodox. The one thing
Mhm.
that he has done is that he also does not have tackle on a blitzer. He has instead opted for a kick line rat.
Mhm.
And as we talked about, the juggernaut on the rat ogre, leader on the throw, block wrestle, sidestep, strip ball, all of those on the gutter runners. Um,
Mhm.
and is so Skaven is going up against against yours truly, Necromantic Horror, I believe.
Yep. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. It should be an interesting matchup. It's one that I'm happy that I have the sure hands for,
mm-mm,
because with the combination of kick and strip ball, like, he can certainly play that game of getting the ball into a scary spot. And if you muff a pickup, like you're really in trouble. And even if you do pick it up, with strip ball, he can oftentimes jump in and take a shot. So it's certainly one that I'm happy to have the sure hands for.
Mm.
The Juggernaut's interesting because it kind of counteracts some of my stand firm.
Yep.
But I think it's a matchup where my 4 guards should be able to provide some good value. And I guess we'll have to see how it goes. But yeah, I think like I said, in the end of the day, the necro build that I do have with the strip ball, with the sure hands, maybe is in a decent spot to kind of handle the roster. So
Yeah, and I certainly do think that this like Skaven coaches, I feel are often play a fairly aggressive game when it comes to, and I think at like necro can kind of counteract that because yes, the gutter runners have movement 9 on them, so they can get into places, but the movement 8 wolves are only ever going to be one step behind that, and they're a lot more dangerous even as players go. So I feel it's very much going to come down to can you start how soon you can start to get attrition on the rats, because again the Skaven linemen are going to run thin probably at some point, and the question is just when to get to that point.
Yeah, I mean, he also has 13 players in an apothecary, right?
Yeah.
So he's kind of built to take some attrition.
Yeah.
So that, the other thing too is, um, with my roster, it kind of helps defend against some of the one-turn touchdown stuff that the Juggernaut sidestep might otherwise pose some threats for.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely the kick and is a signal that he's looking to play aggressively. Yeah.
All right. We have Ionek is playing the Amazons, and this is the Amazon roster that is bringing in a dirty player, though they are not bringing in a bribe. Oh, that's
Mhm.
and then we have the, as mentioned, we have the block wrestle on the blitzers, but also gone for wrestle on the blockers, so no guard to be had here. Her hands for the thrower, so no leader there, and then block wrestle line woman. Like I can't say that I feel that I made my personal feelings on it fairly clear, but I just not having any guard at all on a on an Amazon team just feels it just feels very bad, to me at least.
Mhm. Well, he's a very highly ranked Amazon coach,
Mm,
so I trust that he's comfortable playing it
mm,
that way. Personally, I've never seen somebody take wrestle on the blocker, at least not in
mm.
my local meta. It's usually either block or guard.
Yeah.
So I'm sure, I mean, there's obviously some logic to that,
Mm,
but I personally I like to have those guys standing.
mm.
And so the wrestle maybe does some things that maybe they can leverage it, that force strength wrestle piece with some mobility that can do some damage for sure. I think the big thing that's kind of interesting, if you will, is that dirty player.
Mm,
Without the bribe, you're probably looking at more of a situational usage.
mm.
And he's going to be going up against Drakenspear's High Elves.
Yeah.
So a team that has 11 players in an apothecary.
Mm,
So that dirty player, does it get sent off on the first foul? Does it, obliterate 6 players? Like a lot of things can kind of happen
yeah.
in that regard. But one area where Amazon does or can struggle is that their team speed is not. I mean, it's not as fast as you kind of expect it to be,
Mm, mm.
and maybe the team speed with the high elves, which is a little bit faster. Maybe that can kind of play into his advantages, especially with those extra rerolls kind of. So 3 wrestles on the team. Three blocks, there's a lot of skills there, and then the dirty player is kind of a bit of a wild card that
Mm.
can single-handedly turn a game, or could be completely useless and get sent off on the first foul. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the like having this amount of wrestle, like especially like the idea with the wrestle on the blocker, I feel is just like the wrestle does enable the dirty player, like especially against like as much blodge as you have on the high elf team is like, oh sure, we just take the both down and we wrestle you to the ground, and then here comes the boot. Like it is that, but yeah,
Yeah.
as you said, it comes down to so much to the variance that a fouling sort of fouling damage dealing game plan has. It can go buck wild, or it can just get shut down immediately if the dice don't go there.
Mhm. Mhm.
All right. Mentos, Wood Elves. Um, we have a treeman here. We have just full lineup of dodges on the lineman. Leader thrower, triple tackle, and then three catchers. It's
Mhm.
um I like just looking at the roster, I think I would personally at least have one like wrestler among the linemen. Like just because of
Mhm.
like wrestle, it can, like as I said, like can come up so often against those like people block, and you kind of want to have one around, I feel. But like again, like like dodge is certainly like will mean that like you have more consistency on the best thing about a wood elf team, which is like the just the mobility of the.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, it plays into the mobility aspect. I do like the one wrestle as well. I think just bringing down a body
Mm,
opens up a lane that all of a sudden everybody 2+ dodges their way through, and all of a sudden you're on the other side.
yep.
So it can do a lot of things. And just like as a bit of a side point for Bastich's kind of wood elves,
Mm,
is that like the combination of the lack of a tackle
mm,
on the word answer is kind of countered by a wrestle on alignment, right?
yep. Yep.
So he kind of has the frenzy there as well, but um, that kind of gives him that kind of other kind of dimension to dealing with a blodge kind of player. And this one's also a wood elf versus wood elf matchup,
Yeah.
so um, will be kind of interesting. I think, for example, the obviously the tackle ward answer has a lot of targets to use his tackle on.
Mm,
Um, this is one of those where the tree man might struggle to keep up with the pace.
mm,
Um, but he might also take out a couple of linemen on blocks off the line, especially if it's a high scoring affair with a lot of kickoffs.
yeah.
So there's it can kind of go either way as well. The three dodge built in there, certainly in addition to the three catchers.
Mm,
So that's a lot of dodge to deal with
yeah.
without a tackle. But most of them don't have block as
Yep.
well. So the frenzy with the block, obviously, on the word answer, like maybe has a pretty good odds at getting some knockdowns there as well. So I think it'll be an interesting matchup. Yeah, two very different Wood Elf teams, though.
Two very different Wood Elf teams, but like certainly I would expect an explosive match. Because of like both the fragility in like inherent in both being Wood Elves, as well as like the maximums they can. So
Hmm.
yeah, I would certainly expect that, like from a tournament standpoint, where often you like win with one touchdown. Right? You don't need to win with any more. So, but like from that sort of a standpoint, I think we might like this. This is one of those matchups where I would be expecting like high score.
Hmm.
All right. We have Misiosaurus, uh, Chaos Dwarves. Chaos Dwarves not being a very popular. I believe there's been one Chaos Dwarf roster before this, and that was on the
Hmm.
Spanish team, if I remember correctly. But yeah, not a very popular choice. Um, and this one is very different from the Chaos Dwarf roster that we saw before. This one has
Hmm.
both of the Bold Centaur Blitzers have the block. They've got the 3 guard on the dwarf blockers, and they have an apothecary, 2 rerolls. Obviously, all of the blockers are here. That is 5 Hobgoblin linemen, and then they have Fungus the Loon, which is
Mhm.
interesting choice. Uh, I feel it's like I don't have too much experience like seeing Chaos Dwarves in action, so I am a little bit like going to be relying on your expertise on like your thoughts on the team as a whole.
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly you don't see fungus loon very often on them,
Mm-mm.
or at least I haven't. Um, it's certainly interesting. It's certainly different. Um, it so he's going to be matched up against our orcs,
Mm.
and um, so this is maybe where you're glad to have that extra couple guards and a block, some extra block on the biggins to
Yep.
maybe uh, get rid of fungus. So, and if nothing else, to have the high armor that even with the mighty blow hits when fungus knocks people down, that hopefully doesn't really do too much damage. You know, you got the three guards on the blockers that probably can help kind of protect fungus a bit, and the blitzer, the bull centaurs are have got lots of mobility. I think it'll be an interesting matchup. Certainly there's a bit of an investment in the fungus side there.
Mm.
I think that cost him a skill, and um, it does have a deep bench associated with it as well.
Yep.
I mean, that's 14 bodies, although you're not really expecting fungus to last for more than one drive.
Yep.
Um, but yeah, 14 bodies, including an apothecary, right? So there's a lot of resilience built in there. Also, only two rerolls,
Yeah.
so you get some unfortunate dice. There's no sure hands anywhere. If you're ball carrying with a hobgoblin, presumably, like they've got no defensive skills, so maybe there's some opportunities there. Yeah, there's some. Certainly, it's interesting. It's not it's not a build I've seen before,
Mm.
and I think fungus is. I mean, he can certainly do crazy things sometimes, right? So, um, you know, with all these kind of stars um, and particularly one that is a ball and chain, like you're kind of hoping for the right outcome there.
Mm.
And if you get it, maybe that really plays to your benefit. And if you don't, maybe it's to your detriment. And investing one skill in 80K is actually not that much of an
Mm.
investment. He's got pretty good coverage of skills across the board otherwise. And so maybe you're giving yourself the chance at playing that upside without saying, okay, even if fungus is a dud, with two block bulls and three guard blockers, I should still be able to get myself a tie.
Yep. I do think that because I think he is fairly happy about the fact that your orc team does not have a mighty blow blitz, because I think
Mm-hmm.
like if the orcs, like if that blitzer in particular could start hunting down the hobgoblins, like especially as you said, like with only the two rerolls, the chaos dwarves aren't renowned for their ability to ball handle and move it along, so like the mighty blow blitzer could do real work on here. But I also do think that like with the troll in there, especially the troll with the guard, like an only 3 guard for the chaos dwarves, I feel that they're gonna struggle into actually like being able to like stand up in the brawling wall with the 3 like block on the biggins, so they can't, as you said before, like they can't as much rely on, oh well, I have block and he doesn't, so I'll just go for this one die now. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, so that might play nicely. And I agree. I think with the Mighty Blow, um, Blitzer would run around hunting those hobgoblins, especially because if fungus is on the pitch, he has to be protected.
Yeah.
So that means effort has to be put into protecting him.
Mm.
Otherwise, the orcs gang up on him,
Yep.
and that maybe opens up lanes to blitz some of the other hobgoblins or things like that. So it should be an interesting. It should be an interesting match.
Yep. um We are moving on to Ray Hell, who is bringing in underworld denizens, and as you noted before, like many teams were looking at those underworld, like bringing in an underworld team, before the change of like removal of the swarming, and some teams have
Mhm.
sticked with it, and this one I like I just immediately look down at the end of the roster, and there's 3 bribes in there, and I feel that we both kind of know where this roster is going.
Yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, I mean, listen, the underworld without the swarming was just it was a big unknown, and we didn't feel that we had a sufficient amount of time to investigate and play test options with it. Um, so we decided to steer clear. I think for people that were going for a fouling build for Underworlds, which I think a lot of people were, our team was not looking at that. But for people that were, like, I mean, dirty player and 3 bribes, you're kind of going, you're really selling out on that. It's a deep bench as well, but a lot of snotlings in the mix. And the trouble with the lack of swarming is that you only have 11 bodies on the pitch, and as I added up, there's only 10 non-snotlings, which means
Mm,
that there's at least one snotling on the pitch at all times.
mm, mm.
It's got the troll, so it doesn't have the rat ogre that oftentimes would be biting, the snotling and then going
Yeah,
doing its thing, which also was a little bit more of a viable strategy when you had 3 extra players potentially on the pitch.
yeah,
Um, so that kind of, I guess, maybe makes some sense. Um, the troll also gives you a nice guard. You got some block coverage. You got a tackle blitzer that can help kind of, you know, especially given the fact that he's going to be playing against our dark elves.
yeah.
So it's 11-player dark elves. Um, and that's one where, like a dirty player with 3 bribes could definitely do some damage.
Mm,
Um, and kind of on the flip side, any player that gets kind of taken off the pitch is getting replaced, but replaced by a snotling, right? So, and given that there's only going to be 11 of them on there, it's kind of be a bit of an interesting kind of trade-off. Is that when you had 3, potentially up to 3 extra snotlings on the pitch,
mm.
you were a little bit more willing maybe to kind of toss them into dangerous positions, let
Yeah.
them get hits. It was kind of a weird thing where both sides kind of wanted to target the snotlings because you wanted to get bodies off the pitch to try and even things up, but also you're like, cool, hit my snotlings and not my rats.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, and so now it's maybe a little bit of a different dynamic, and yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that kind of plays out. But I think if the dirty player goes off, I mean, obviously that's going to be challenging. But
mm,
at the same time, if the um, any removal, whether it's a KO or whatever it might be, for the underworld player, means that that player is being replaced by a snotling.
yeah,
And I think snotlings mean that with the lack of tackle zones, that the elves can be more mobile. It means that the elves can remove that snotling much quicker,
mm,
rather
mm.
like early on in that next drive. So I think that also creates some opportunities. So it'll be interesting to see how the attrition kind of where it goes, because that kind of can really influence I think how that match will play out.
Yeah. I do think that like just the amount of block that the dark elves like just bring in, like with both like a block witch and the 4 blitzers, and like that is, I think, going to like, and all of that being also like accompanied with dodge. I think that is going to be the key to the dark elf success. And like there's also the fact that like you guys are bringing the runner, which means that like even if the underworld are gonna go like aggressively try to go for that like ball carrier sack, just the fact that like, well, he's got dump off, so the moment that you declare that blitz, he's gonna be like, the ball is gonna be moved on to probably somebody who has bludge, and suddenly
Mhm.
like the blitz doesn't like have like, has way less value now. Is I think gonna be big. So I do think that the underworld is going to be at a disadvantage here against the dark elves, like just because of like you have a whole lot of blodge, and then you got a lot of block to, like, so you'll always have a player with block to go hunting for those snotlings if like when the situation arises. So
Mhm.
and you're all, obviously you also have an assassin in the team, and underworld is one of those teams where an assassin can just go and like, just like, even the shadowing is going to find value in this matchup.
Yeah, well, even just like a stab off the line or a stab on a snotling, right? Like, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. But yeah, I'm very curious to see like, and I feel that a lot of coaches and like team captains especially are going to be very curious to see like just how much like can the underworld teams that are coming along, like how much can they actually accomplish? Because as you said, like they are definitely like an unknown quantity. Like just how good are they after this? I feel that a lot of high end coaches have like have really dropped them in their regard. So it will be interesting if they can hold their brave new world.
Mm-hmm.
All right. We have Rezka, Shambling Undead, and what to say about this other than this looks pretty standard.
Mm-hmm.
It's no fancy tricks. Not even a wrestle on one of the ghouls. Tackle blitzer. Both mummies have guard. White blitzer for the more mobile guard. Like I mean, it's an undead team. What's not to like? It's very very solid.
Yeah, yeah, definitely very standard, very solid. Not anything you can really argue against. I had seen a number that had taken the second goal instead of block, had dropped that to a wrestle
Hmm.
or changed that to a wrestle, and then oftentimes enabled an extra skill by
Hmm.
taking the extra skill pack.
Yep.
And sometimes, I don't know that I really saw people do that, but if you're going to drop that block to a wrestle, you can maybe even justify taking like a mighty blow or something on the other white to kind of
Hmm.
help kind of that attrition game, and then maybe a sure-handed ghoul as a bit of a ball carrier or help gain some strip ball. This is one where but yeah, this is totally standard, totally hard to argue about any of that. The tackle gives you that kind of robust protection. Three guards. I mean, you're hoping to get plenty of reliable blocks. You got three rerolls. You got two blodge ghouls. Like it's a just solid team.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
he's going
and
up against your Skaven team as his opponent. Um,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I like I've played Undead quite a bit. Like they are one of the teams that I've played the most like in my entire Blood Bowl career, and I like generally think that like Skaven are a fairly bad matchup for them. Like just overall because of that speed and the like the Rat Ogre, like now that it's gotten like even better than what it once was. Like the Rat Ogre is like, especially since you're running him with the block, he's gonna be an
Yeah.
issue. The two guard on the blitzers is like is gonna help you out as well, and it's just like they're there are gonna be very few, if any, chances for the white blitzer, like with tackle, to actually get a shot at a gutter runner, and even then, like it's not like it is not at all guaranteed that even if he gets that shot, even if he gets him down, that there's ever like actually going to be a removal, and like it is just I
Mhm.
feel one of those matchups where like the Skaven can definitely run circles around the on undead team, and there's like they're relying on the mummies, like it's like starting to clear the field of the Skaven, and like that's I think their best shot at winning is that if they start actually actively
Mhm.
using them.
Yeah, the two guard will be interesting because it kind of, again, it doesn't counter the three guard on the
Mm,
undead, but it certainly fights back more than you'd expect.
yeah.
And the block on the rat ogre as well, kind of against the non-block on the mummy, like with the right guard placements, you might be able to get a couple of those mummies down and out of position, and that might be interesting. I think this is an interesting point, kind of back to what you had kind of mentioned about the lack of strip ball
Mm,
on the Skaven team, is
mm,
like the lack of strip ball combined with the lack of a tackle means that maybe there isn't the best counter to those blodge ghouls compared to what you might otherwise have wanted.
mm,
And does that end up can that be leveraged? I guess time will tell, but there's certainly, I think, some chances on both sides, and like you said, the general team speed on the Skaven side, can hopefully, take advantage of some openings. But undead team is super solid, and like even like with the team speed of Skaven, like it's still not I think an easy matchup either way. Yeah.
All right. And then once again, last but not least, we have Vinny with Lizardmen, and I mean, this is like not much to say about this roster except that there's the difference that we highlighted in your Lizardmen roster is that instead of
Yeah.
we have the chameleon skink rather than the assistant.
Yeah, so I guess we'll find out once and for all whether or not the chameleon skink is the right choice or not, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Because
this is going to be a very balanced match. I mean, I think everyone's got block, everyone's got basically the same skills.
yeah.
The chameleon skink's a little slower, but comes with the on the ball. It comes with slightly better passing in the cases that you do need it, and the shadowing in some cases that maybe he can shadow a skink for some reason. Yeah, I don't know, but I think it's a pretty balanced match. Very very similar builds. Who knows? Maybe that extra assistant coach becomes a factor when brilliant coaching comes up, and all of a sudden you get that third reroll and they don't, or something. So that could also be an interesting factor. But I think both coaches having that apothecary is really valuable on Lizardmen. It's hard to remove a Saurus or Crocs or something, and if you just get one of those dumb luck KOs or something early on, just apothecarying it right away and just kind of ensuring that body stays out there,
Yeah.
I think is super critical, and that helps kind of reduce the variance of some dumb luck, if you will. And the fact that both coaches have that means that you kind of expect those to be fairly balanced in terms of not one person getting all bunch of removals or anything like that. And I think that will be a tough balanced game.
It is definitely, I think, going to come down to like obviously there's always dice to be involved in a game of Blood Bowl, but it is definitely going to come down to like who is today going to be, I think, the better coach. Like as often is case, like especially in cases where it's a mirror match where the rosters don't like very significantly like aren't different from one another. Then it is going to come down to like individual coach skill, often the deciding factor.
Yeah, well, oftentimes it's like you said, but there's like a tough situation or a tricky spot, and somebody finds a creative way of getting themselves out of it and creating an opportunity. Yeah.
All right. Well, that is all of Team Poland and their matchups against you covered. If you have any final words, any sort of things that you would like to say to the listeners or anybody who might be coming up and watching this later, this will be uploaded along with all of the other interviews to YouTube because Twitch does not unfortunately keep the recordings for too long, but there is a playlist that one can find if they want. But any final words, anything?
Well, first, I think just thanks for having me, and it's been nice getting to chat with you and kind of talking a little bit about Team Canada and about our journey. We're very excited to be here, and we look forward to coming year after year. We're excited to have our first round. Poland's a highly ranked team. I saw they were ranked maybe seventh or something in Mike Davies rankings. So they're certainly not an easy matchup, but it's one that we're looking forward to taking on, and hopefully we'll be able to start with a strong statement with a good result. And if nothing else, we're looking forward to some good matches and some very interesting ones, because I think there's some mirror matches in there, and I'd say an overarching theme is that they have some of these heavy, dirty player, star player, Fungus Loon kind of builds, and those are ones that can very easily snowball in their favor, but can also kind of backfire a little bit. So, anything can happen, and we're hopeful to come out with a positive result.
Again, thank you for coming. No, it is generally probably a hectic time for most teams. With the tournament like drawing so close, you can almost smell it already. So again, thank you for making the time. Thank you for being here. Thank you everybody else who's watching or already or is watching this on the video VOD for watching. Hope everybody was entertained. Hope everyone has potentially learned something, if nothing else, gained insights to Team Canada and their sort of like how they think about things and like what kind of attitude they're going to be bringing to the table. We're gonna be tomorrow. We're hoping to catch Team Lithuania captain in the early morning hours after breakfast, and that is probably going to be the last sort of national team interview that we're going to be doing. Just because, well, every team is probably at this point is already like either making the final preparations for their journey or is in Greece already. So we wouldn't want to impose on them as the important tourney is drawing closer. And as I always say, good day, good afternoon, good evening, good night, whatever happens to be the time of day for you. Have a good one.